She's too stupid to realize what's really going on. Those words, child, were like a knife twisting inside me. And they came not from a stranger, not from some cruel person passing me by on the street, but from my own son, the boy I carried, the boy I fed when I had nothing for myself, the boy I once believed was my very reason for breathing. I was standing there in his home, near the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of roasted chicken I had spent all day preparing. The smell of herbs and garlic clung to my hands. I had cooked it the same way his father used to love it, hoping maybe my son would taste it and remember the warmth of his childhood. But instead, he sat at the long polished table with his wife's family around him, their jewelry glittering under the lights, their voices buzzing with laughter and wine. And then I heard it. His voice. My son's voice. She's too stupid to realize what's really going on. They laughed. All of them. I felt my hands shake, and the tray nearly slipped from my grip. But I held it firm, because I have always held things firm. I forced a smile, though my lips trembled. I stepped forward and placed the food on the table, as if nothing inside me had just shattered. They turned their eyes back to their plates quickly, brushing off the moment like dust on a sleeve. But inside, child, something broke. Something that had been holding me together for years. Do you know what it feels like to hear your own child dismiss you, as if you were a fool? Do you know the silence that follows, the way your heart beats so loudly it feels like everyone must hear it, though no one even looks at you? That night, I tasted nothing. I smiled when I had to. I nodded when someone thanked me for the food. But when I went to bed, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing only his laughter. She's too stupid to realize what's really going on. Therefore, my mind went back to the years I had given him, back to the life I had lived before that night. And as I lay there, I began to understand something. The pain of betrayal is not born in a single moment. It is grown, piece by piece, over years of sacrifice, until finally one sentence makes the whole weight come crashing down. Child, I was not always this old woman you see before you. I was once a girl with dreams. I wanted to study, to travel, to walk roads my small town had never shown me. But life has its way of closing doors. My father grew ill when I was just 16. He was a good man, strong and kind, but sickness does not care for kindness. Therefore, I left school. I worked. I cleaned houses, I washed clothes, I cared for my younger brothers so my mother could sit beside my father's sickbed. My hands grew rough long before they should have. But still, I dreamed of a family of my own one day. A family I would care for, a family who would know love, no matter how poor we were. When I met your grandfather, he was not rich, not educated, not the kind of man people thought would bring a woman comfort. He worked in a small factory, his clothes stained with grease, his hands dark from labor. But he had eyes that looked at me like I mattered. Eyes that said, "You are seen." Therefore, I chose him. Not for wealth, not for safety, but for love. Our beginning was humble. We lived in a one-room apartment with peeling paint and water that dripped through the ceiling when it rained. At night, I stitched clothes by a small lamp, and at dawn, I baked bread to sell at the market. We counted every penny, but we laughed together. We found joy in the little we had. And then, the day your father was born, my only son, I felt the world shift. I looked at his tiny face, his small fists curled tight, and I thought, this is my reason now. This is my purpose. Every tear, every hardship, every sleepless night, it all became worth it because I had him. But life is cruel, child. It does not stop testing you just because you have given it your heart. Your grandfather, strong as he was, died suddenly when your father was still small. A heart attack at work. One moment I was cooking dinner, waiting for him to come home, and the next moment, men from the factory were at my door, hats in their hands, eyes downcast. My world collapsed. I was a widow with debts I could not count and a boy who depended on me for everything. Therefore, I worked harder. Harder than a body should. I scrubbed floors in houses where the women wore perfume and diamonds, while I wore shoes with holes in the soles. I stitched dresses that would be worn once and discarded, while I wore the same faded clothes for years. I cooked for others while sometimes my own stomach ached with hunger. But I never let my boy go without. His belly was full. His shoes were strong. His schoolbooks were new, even if mine were long abandoned. I believed, foolishly perhaps, that love and sacrifice were enough. That if I gave him everything, he would grow with gratitude in his heart. That he would one day see me as the woman who carried him, raised him, bled for him. But as he grew older, he began to forget. He forgot the nights I stayed awake by his bedside when fever racked his body. He forgot the mornings I walked miles in the snow just to bring him a hot meal at school. He forgot the years I denied myself so that he could have more. And then, that night, the laughter, the words, "She's too stupid to realize what's really going on." I understood the truth. He had not only forgotten. He had changed. But hear me well, child. That night was not the end of me. It was the beginning. Because sometimes betrayal does not destroy you, it awakens you. Therefore, as I sat there in the silence of my room, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer let my life be a shadow behind his. I would rise, even in my old age. And those who thought me weak, those who laughed at me, would one day learn the truth. Because no matter how heavy the world has been, no matter how cruel others have treated me, I have survived. And survival, child, is its own kind of power. Tonight, I tell you this not to fill your heart with sadness, but to remind you, every wound carries a lesson. Every betrayal carries a spark. And sometimes, that spark is what lights the fire that will change everything. Therefore, listen closely to the rest of my story. Because the woman they called stupid, the woman they mocked, became the woman they could never silence. Child, after that night when I heard my son laugh at me, I wanted to cry. My body begged for tears, but none would come. I had already wept enough in my life. My eyes had dried out like a river that had been stolen by drought. Instead, there was only silence inside me. But silence is dangerous, because sometimes silence holds fire. The next morning, when I stepped out of his house, the sky was grey, and the air smelled of rain. I carried nothing with me but my old handbag and my dignity, though both felt heavier than stones. My son did not follow me. His wife did not stop me. I closed the gate behind me, and it sounded final, like a door ceiling shut forever. Therefore, I walked. I walked until my legs ached, until the rain began to fall. And as the water soaked my clothes, I whispered to myself, they will not see me break. They will not see me crawl. I went back to my small traditional home, the one you sit in with me now, child. The roof leaked, the wood was weak, the walls bore the scars of years of storms. But it was mine. Mine. And it was here that I decided something. I would no longer live as the background character in my son's story. I would become the author of my own. Do you know what it means to begin again, when the world believes you are too old? It means swallowing every insult, every doubt, every sneer, and turning it into fuel. People whispered, she's nothing without her son. Others said, she's too weak to manage on her own. But I smiled. Because what they did not understand was that weakness can disguise itself as patience. And patience, child, is the sharpest weapon of all. Therefore, I began to work. At first, it was the small things. I started selling the little recipes I had guarded all my life, the breads, the pies, the sauces your grandfather once loved. Neighbors came to buy them. Strangers heard of them. Slowly, coins began to fill the glass jar on my shelf. I did not spend them. I saved every single one. Because I had a vision bigger than just surviving. But life tested me again. There were nights when I had to choose between eating or saving. Nights when loneliness crept in like a thief, whispering, "Why do you fight? Why not just surrender?" And yet, I refused to bow. I thought of my son's laughter. I thought of those words, "She's too stupid to realize what's really going on." And I clenched my fists, whispering back, "Watch me. Watch what I will become." Therefore, my small kitchen became my battlefield. The flour on my hands became my weapon. The oven's heat became my forge. And my heart, though scarred, burned like a soldier's. Every loaf of bread, every jar of jam, every plate of food I sold, it was not just food. It was proof. Proof that I could rise without him. But here is something I learned, child. Success does not come like thunder, fast and loud. It comes like the slow drip of water carving a stone. Little by little, I began to earn respect. People started calling me the bread woman, then the kitchen queen. Local markets invited me. Cafes wanted to sell my recipes. What started as survival became a business. I remember the day I held my first real earnings in my hands. My fingers trembled as I counted the bills, my chest heavy with disbelief. I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." And it was. Therefore, I registered my small business under my own name. Not my son's, not my husband's, not anyone else's, mine. For the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. The papers felt heavy in my hands, heavier than gold. But success brought whispers back to my son's home. Suddenly, his wife's family began asking questions. Suddenly, they began to mention my name at their table, not with mockery, but with curiosity. And do you know what my son did? He acted as if none of his words had ever been said. He came to visit, bringing his wife with him, wearing the same smile he had once used to charm me as a boy. He said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were doing so well? We could help you. We could expand your business. Help me." I almost laughed. Therefore, I served them tea, and I listened. I watched his wife's eyes dart around my little home, measuring it, as though already planning what she would take if it grew into something bigger. But I said nothing. Because sometimes, child, the greatest revenge is patience. I knew they had not come for me. They had come for what I had built. They had come for the woman they once called stupid, but who was no longer bending under their shadow. And so, I smiled. I nodded. I spoke little. But inside, the fire grew hotter. Because I knew something they did not. I was not done yet. My little business was only the seed. I was planting something much bigger, something that would one day bloom in a way they could never control. Therefore, I began to dream even bigger. I took the earnings, and instead of resting, I invested. I found suppliers. I hired 2 young women from the village who needed work. They became like daughters to me, loyal, hardworking, grateful. With them by my side, the kitchen became a small company. And the company became a name people trusted. But still, I kept my secret. I never told my son how much I earned. I never told his wife how far my reach had grown. I let them believe I was still the fragile old woman they mocked, barely surviving, barely thinking. Because sometimes, child, it is better to be underestimated. It gives you space to grow in the shadows, unnoticed, until the day you choose to step into the light. And I promise you, the day will come when those who laughed will not laugh anymore. The day will come when they will taste the bitterness of their own betrayal. But before that day arrived, I had to carry one truth in my heart: success alone was not enough. I needed to heal the wound of betrayal. I needed justice for every sacrifice forgotten, every insult thrown, every night I went hungry so my son could eat. Therefore, I waited. And I built. And with every coin I saved, every deal I made, I was sharpening the blade of my revenge, not with anger, but with patience, with discipline, with certainty. Child, listen carefully now, because what I tell you next is the heart of my story. The woman they dismissed, the mother they mocked, the grandmother they called stupid, she was preparing for a day that would turn their laughter into silence. And that day was coming closer than they could ever imagine. Child, years passed. My little kitchen grew into a company with my name on its door. What once smelled of flour and firewood now smelled of success. People trusted my food, and they trusted me. Investors came. Banks came. The same neighbors who once pitied me now nodded with respect. And when the offer came to buy my company, not for thousands, but for millions, I signed the papers with a steady hand. $18 million. Can you imagine? A number so big it almost frightened me. But do you know what frightened me more? The thought of what my son and his wife would do once they heard. And, of course, they came. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold and crimson, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it, and there he was, my son, my only son, with his wife clutching his arm. They wore smiles as wide as rivers, but their eyes were sharp, hungry. Mom, he said sweetly, as if the past had never happened, we are so proud of you. We heard about the sale. You've done amazing. We were thinking, maybe we could help manage the money. You know, so it doesn't get wasted. I looked at him, child. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had fed when I went hungry, the boy whose laughter had once been my music, and whose betrayal had been my deepest wound. And in that moment, I realized something: forgiveness is noble, but forgetting is foolish. Therefore, I smiled, and I invited them in. I poured them tea. I listened to their plans. They spoke of investments, houses, vacations. Not once did they ask if I was well, if I was happy, if I was lonely. Not once did they mention love. Only money. But I was ready. Son, I said softly, I am grateful you came. Truly. But you see, I already decided what to do. The money has been placed in trusts, in charities, in scholarships for children who remind me of myself when I was young, poor, but full of fire. And the rest is safe in accounts you will never touch. His wife's face turned pale. His hands tightened around the teacup. He stammered, Mom, why wouldn't you trust your own family? And I leaned forward, my voice steady as stone, because family is not built on blood alone. Family is built on love, respect, and loyalty. And you, my son, showed me none of those. Silence fell heavy in the room. He tried to laugh it off, but his laugh sounded hollow, desperate. His wife whispered something under her breath, her eyes darting toward the door. They left quickly, without finishing their tea. That night, for the first time in many years, I slept without heaviness in my chest. Because my revenge was not loud, not cruel. It was simple. They wanted to use me, but I turned their greed into their punishment. They thought I was powerless, but I built an empire. They thought I would crawl back, but I stood taller than ever. Therefore, child, listen carefully, revenge does not always mean striking back with violence or anger. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is living well, living so well that those who hurt you must watch, helpless, as you rise higher than they ever dreamed. But remember the moral too, never let bitterness eat your soul. Forgive in your heart, but do not give fools the power to wound you twice. Protect your dignity. Protect your worth. And that is why, when you heard me laugh softly today, as I stirred the pot on my little stove, it was not just laughter. It was victory. Quiet, patient, dignified victory. Therefore, my dear grandchild, let this be the lesson you carry: never underestimate the strength of a woman who has been betrayed, and never forget, respect is the only true inheritance you can give your parents. Without it, even millions will taste like ashes. And with that, child, my story ends. But yours is only beginning.